Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. Hi, and welcome to episode 128 of Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. In this episode, we have brought Richard back, and we're going to talk about, number one, brass availability. So there's some issues coming down the pipe, and we want to make sure that we spread the word that if you need brass, if you reload, you should probably be searching for some now. And then we're going to talk a little bit about wind. You know, we were talking about the effects of it, and when people talk about different calibers, trying to beat it into submission, weight, there's all these things. But just really the concept, I think, that makes sense to most people, just so maybe they can get a grasp on really just what they're working with and what they're dealing with and some of the best ways to really try to best it to get the bullet where you want to go. So without further ado, here we go. So before we get started, I do want to say a quick thanks to MDT, maker of fantastic chassis. The new J. Allen is on the market. The new ACC Elite is going to be released soon. So if you want to upgrade your factory rifle or if you're building a custom, take a look at MDT's new lineup. It keeps growing every year from the ACC Elite down to the HNT 26, which makes a fantastic hunting chassis. So to learn more, go over to mdttac.com. That's mdttac.com. Also, don't forget to stop over to TriggerTech, maker of world-class triggers. We put them in all of our custom rifles here. Easy to install, easy to adjust, one screw adjustment, two-stage, single-stage, straight shoe, curved shoe, pro shoe, and they make them for many different makes and models. So if you want to upgrade your rifle and you want to do it with the trigger, put the best in it, and that is TriggerTech. So stop over to TriggerTech.com. That's TriggerTech.com today. All right, so welcome back to the show, Richard.
Hey, Jamie.
Caught him off guard.
I was looking at why did I leave my water bottle on my desk over there?
He's like, I got to wet my whistle, and he looks over, and it's on the other desk.
It's on the other side of the room.
Oh, that's funny. Well, I asked Richard to come back on to talk a little bit about the new issues that we're having, and we had got some insight on brass availability.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
supply chain troubles yet again.
Yeah, here it comes. So for those of you that haven't gotten it yet, Lupul made their announcement that they're stopping production, possibly in brass, or whether they're making military brass. Nobody really knows, you know, everything that goes on behind the scenes. But we did talk to some people that manufacture brass here in the United States, very high-end stuff, and they said that Europe has stopped making zinc.
Digging zinc, or what are they doing?
I guess the production of it, it's so energy
intensive, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
and they can't afford to waste energy on making brass for us.
How about that?
That's not good.
Yeah, so he said this is an American manufacturer now, saying they were sourcing brass all over the place and materials trying to get and make sure that they can stay in business for next year. But that was their announcement as Europe had stopped the manufacturing of zinc, and that's a major component in rifle brass.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're in the market for a rifle brass, or you may be within the next 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, it's a planning horizon, right? We all know it's going to run out eventually. What we've got is going to have loose primer pockets or worse.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a planning ahead time, right? If you shoot something that consumes brass and you don't have enough for a couple of years out of what you consider to be your regular volume of shooting, then time to start searching around and see what you can get.
Yeah, source it like crazy. Don't throw your old stuff away. But plan now, because what's going to happen is when this really starts to take hold, and, you know, the shooting season sort of ended and it's going to pick up again, you know, January, February, March, everybody's starting to get tooled up. And what will happen is just like what's happened with everything else. You'll have all your, I don't want to use an inappropriate word, but there's a lot of people that will go out and make the problem worse that aren't in our industry and buying it all up and then posting up on GunBroker at 3 or 4 times the price. So it's almost like a self-induced shortage at that point that just accentuates the problem.
Yeah, and hurts us all in the long run, right?
Yeah, some of these people ought to be dragged into a street and beaten with a rubber hose because they're profiteers.
Ooh.
You know,
that's a strong word, profiteering.
Yeah,
everybody knows what it means, right? Making too much money at the wrong time.
Yeah, and then, you know, just using our industry to do it. Like, they know they can go on GunBroker and sell an 8-pound keg of Varget for $895, and What we found was some of the people even inside that had gun stores, because they were obligated to sell at retail or minimum advertised pricing, you know how that stuff goes. So rather than putting it for sale, they were sending it out the back door with Cousin Joe to take to the local gun show to sell it for twice. Because, in their eyes, why should we sell it to the public and make $50 or $80 off an 8-pound keg when that person is going to put it on a gun broker and make $300 or $400?
Yeah, we shouldn't be supporting those people.
No. I told, we have one of our guys here, Walt, I told him that because he was really hard up for Vargett, and we had some here, and I said, look, I'll just give it to you and just replace it when you get it. But I said, if you buy anything off a gun broker like that for $1,000 for an 8-pound keg, I'm not going to have some nice words for you, because it just encourages them to keep doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what you can do if you're desperate. I mean, I guess you just got to keep trolling around and seeing what you can find. And I know that most of the manufacturers that I've seen, or suppliers, I should say, you can normally put out put your email address in there, and they'll say, notify when available, and you just got to watch your emails, right? Because they'll tell you when it's coming in or when they've got some, and you may not be able to get an 8-pound jug, but at least you'll be able to get a pound or two, and then that'll push you through for a little bit longer at least.
Yeah, and if you're smart, like what we were doing is we were opening up all the pages to all the major distributors, including Hodgkins. So, you got Hodgkins, Mid-South Shooter Supply, Midway USA, Grafs and Son, Powder Valley.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a bunch of them. Open up the page to what you're looking for. So, like in our case, we were looking for H4350 or primers, and have those 8 pages across the top of your computer. And every time you think about it, go over and hit the refresh button on every single one. And what we found is over the course of a couple months, we pretty much bought everything that we needed. But you had to be really quick to get it, because unfortunately the people that are selling on Gun Broker are very organized as well, and it takes one quick text, and then all of a sudden 30 of their buddies are buying it at the same time and just wiping it out.
Yeah, because no one's going to have a lot of it, but everybody's going to have a little.
Yeah,
right.
And help your friend out. Like what we did is we put up powder out in a showroom that we just didn't use. Like, for example, at the time we weren't shooting a lot of 4831 Shortcut or H1000. Of course, now we're using that for the 22 Creeds, but we put a bunch of it out there for sale, and, didn't rake anybody over the coals, but just put it out there to say, hey, if anybody needs it. And of course, we did have a couple guys that say, hey, can I buy all of it? And we were like, no, if you don't mind, just buy what you really need and save some for the next guy that might need some, And then we had a lot of friends help us out here too, like primers were getting hard to get. So we had a lot of friends who were like, hey, I can spare 2,000, or I can give you this, or we'd barter and trade. I'd trade them something that they needed for stuff that we needed too.
Except I need small rifle primers, and you need them too.
Yeah. Well, I got 5,000 coming, so I think we got some extra coming. But the reason we're bringing this up in this podcast today is because it's going to be an issue soon again, and just everybody that listens to this podcast is probably a shooter.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, in 6 months, we'll all be thinking about what we're going to be doing over the summer, if we're going to be competing or just shooting or whatever, and then we're suddenly going to go, oops, I've only got enough parts available to load another couple of 100 rounds, and then I'm going to have to go do something else.
Yeah, and that
would
sucks.
Be bad.
Yeah. So I'm buying quality brass. Like we have no affiliation with Alpha Brass. They don't sponsor the podcast here. They've been on for an interview, and they're great people, American-made company. But they're one of their things is how long their brass will last, and then maybe get into annealing. Back your loads off to make your brass last longer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do that naturally anyway, because I don't like beating the heck out of all my firearms. But, if you see 2 nodes when you're doing a string, go with the lower one. That extra, maybe 150, 200 feet per second really doesn't get you that much. So
no, and you take Hornady brass, factory brass, which I think is soft. You run that stuff pretty hard, and you're only going to get a couple reloads out of it, where you just back it off, and so you dropped 80 feet per second. Now the brass is lasting twice as long. Yeah,
maybe if you get, you can anneal it, and maybe you'll get 5 out of it.
Yeah,
5 reloads instead of 2.
Yeah, and the amp annealer, we use it here. Caution with annealing if you don't know what you're doing. We use the amp because it's sort of foolproof. We don't have to set any of the parameters to make sure we're not over annealing or under annealing. But annealing has made a big difference. And in range brass, I guess I want to throw a couple of safety things out there. Be careful. Go out and buy all your brass now. I mean, if you shoot LeBoux, you better be ordering it and getting on the list. If not, my second suggestion would be Alpha, and then get Alpha if you can, if they make it, and then Hornady, Winchester, whatever you need to get through, I would say 2 years of shooting, plan for what you need next year and year after.
Yeah, and you were going somewhere with range pickups, so I have a story.
Yeah, range pickups. Just to throw out a caution, I'll let Richard tell the story here, but be careful with once-fired brass that you see people like selling on the internet. We've had customers have bad experiences with that here. You know, you just have to know who you're sourcing it from, where you're getting it, and what your intentions are for it. So if it's just a fun gun to shoot, stuff like that. But we've seen customers buy like hard-to-find brass once fired for like an old 60s or 50s cartridge. It's no longer in existence, and the first round through the gun, they split at the case neck.
Ooh, that's a good segue into my range pickup. So years past, used to shoot 308, was at a match, obviously shooting with other people shooting 308, picked up somebody else's 308, got mixed in with my Lapua I was shooting at the time, went to the next match, and not the case head, case neck separated from the body of the round while fired, and the neck stayed in the chamber. And I actually still have the case and the neck because I've never seen that, hadn't seen that before, and haven't seen it since. But it was a piece of brass. It was a piece of just range pickup. I'll call it range pickup that got mixed in with my Lapua, and I didn't see it when I was reloading, and then had an event that, you know, caused my rifle to be down for a couple of minutes until I managed to get that little, you know, 1/4-inch circle of neck out of the chamber.
So just a word of caution. I mean, if you're really hard for brass and you need some, of course, you can form your own. Like if you shoot 6 Creed, you can buy 6.5 or you can make stuff. But be careful on the stuff that you see that's like once fired for sale on eBay. I'm going to guess that it's all cleaned and looks good, and especially like mixed brass, stuff like that. So I would caution on the once fired thing. If you know the person really well, like if one of our customers came through with a case of brand new 6.5 Creedmoor and shot it up and they don't reload, they'll give it to us and say, hey, you want this because I don't reload. Right.
Yeah.
That's good once fired brass.
Yeah, that's the stuff you can rely on. I mean, I've got a lot of different, like 223 brass, for instance, and I sort it between head stamp, and then I prefer to see the versions of the mill versions where the primer's been crimped, because you know that's once fired, right? Because if it's got a replacement primer in it, then you don't know what it is, toss that. But if it's once fired mill brass and it's got a crimp on it, it's an easy one, right?
Yeah.
So that's one easy one. It's not so good for the more popular rifle calibers beyond 223, but for 223, that's a great way to go.
And I don't want to forget this, so I'm just going to throw this in now. Like when you do use brass fired in other rifles, we talk about this with our custom rifles too, is rifle chamber dimensions are all over the place, and you can run into a big issue taking once fired brass from a really sloppy SAMU-spec factory gun, and now you're working the daylights out of it just to get it to close in your bolt gun, and when you fire it, wants to spring back to its original size of the old chamber, so it's got the spring back to it, and you can get a stuck case that way. It can overswell. It wants to go back to its original oversized dimension. It's got that sort of memory to it, I guess you would say. And you'll shoot it and you'll go to open your bolt. You won't be able to get your bolt open. So we tell customers, especially with our custom rifles, is unless it's been fired in this gun or another gun that's had an ace, don't go take your Savage 308 brass. And I mean, if you're desperate and you take care of it and maybe anneal it and fire a couple of test pieces to make sure it's not a big issue, but I wouldn't go and do 200 or 300 of them. You might wind up with a bunch of brass you can't shoot.
Yeah, and that's another area where if you keep a good eye on things and take some good steady measurements along the way, you know, as you're doing your reloading, which, you know, we should be doing, right, as reloaders, you can probably starve off any potential problems that would come up with the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about that scenario is, you know, a thinning around the case head and eventually a case head separation. That would be the first thing that came to my mind in that situation, because I had that on a Lee Enfield 303 rifle from many, many years ago. You know, because the brass was stretching so much, you reloaded it once and the next time you could literally start see, you could feel it on the inside of the case, how thin it was getting around by the case head.
Yeah.
Right. Huge warning sign.
It is. That's a recipe for disaster. Even I was neck turning some 300 Win Mag brass. It was my personal one just to play with. And something didn't seem right when I was neck turning it onto the shoulder, because we shoot really long bullets and you get that neck shoulder junction and can cause donuts. So it's a preemptive strike to that. I cut a piece of brass in half, and right at the neck shoulder junction on brand new brass was only 1 to 2 thousandths thick. It had stretched. And it wasn't all of them. Obviously, it must have been a couple machines making it at the same time, and it's just these couple got mixed in there. So I had to throw all 300 away.
Yeah, because it's not worth trying to sort them at that point. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Unless you've got an X-ray machine.
Yeah. So it's you get in those scenarios. And then back in the early days of shooting school, the guy with the barrel unscrewing into 300 Win mag. So Richard had helped at our shooting schools when they were first kicking off, and you can tell the story. I mean, you found it. It was amazing. The customer should have bought Richard a really nice dinner because he probably saved him a really bad headache.
Oh yeah, I mean, the guy was struggling somewhat, and I just sort of do the thing you do with an AR, right? You sort of rattle it around a little bit and see if something's loose, like the scope. And I reached down and just sort of gently wiggled the rifle from the scope, and I'm like, wait there, the barrel just moved. And then it was reached the end of the barrel and wiggling the barrel, and the barrel was loose on a 300 Win mag.
It was unscrewing while he was shooting. Yeah. So the gunsmith had set the head spacing wrong. It wasn't us. And so it wouldn't close on a piece of brass because a 300 Win mag has a belted magnum. So he loosened the barrel up and then snugged it lighter rather than remachining it. And it had loosened up on him. And then, the hindsight 2020 is you could look in his brass that he had been shooting, and some of them you could see the necks or the case head was separate, it was pulling.
Yeah,
and
pulling away.
You could see where it was going to fail.
Yeah. And that, I mean, I don't wish to support the gunsmith's technique, but it probably would have worked if it had been a 223 Remington, but not on a 300 Win mag.
No, and honestly, he might have found that a chip got in there and had it completely out of the lathe and didn't want to redo it all again. That's sort of the downside of the custom gunsmithing work is when you find stuff like this, you're going back and you're working twice as hard for the same amount of money, and that's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just part of coming with the territory.
Yeah. But I was glad that I found it.
Oh my God! Because if it had turned a 16th of a turn more, it would have probably separated the case.
Yeah, that would have been bad.
Yeah. So if you're in the market for brass, or people that shoot a lot with you, I would be passing the word around quietly. Don't make a big announcement on Facebook. Panic buy brass. But till the word starts to get out that this is going to get in thin supply, I'd be probably buying it up and then helping your friends out and buying some extra if they need it too.
Yeah, and I have to hope. I've got my fingers crossed here that, this is something that will get resolved quickly. And the reason I say that is because I want the actions that are going on in Europe right now to get resolved quickly. And then hopefully that'll bring the world back into order, and then zinc won't be in short supply anymore.
Yeah. Who would have thought in this day and age?
Yeah.
The other thing we were talking about on break, we were talking this morning about wind and talking about its effect and how shooters sort of visualize it and how they think it pushes a bullet, some of the things that go on to it. So we were talking about, how do you explain this to students? And, when I explain in the class, I talk about, the flowing of water. And when you're talking to students and trying to talk with them about the wind, and we were talking about the different effects of it, you can chime in a little bit on what we were thinking. We were talking about speed versus BC. We were comparing the 6 Creed 108 to the 22 Creed 88 grain, and the 22 Creed 88 grain has a higher BC. And still the 6 Creed and about the same time of flight.
Yeah, it was within 0.1 of a second, right?
Yeah.
Between the two out to 1,000.
And do you remember off the top of your head which one bested?
So the 6 millimeter carried more energy at the 1,000-yard point. But I think the 22 Creed got there first.
Yeah, just a little bit.
So 22 Creed had the speed advantage, but 6 millimeter had the energy advantage.
So what would when you're trying to tell a customer or someone getting into shooting, they always think that wind is like they're intimidated by it, right? But what would be your approach to saying, look, here it is, it's just part of what it is, it's what Mother Nature does, and you're going to shoot through it whether you like it or not? How would you approach, saying, look, you can't beat the wind into submission, it's just part of what it is? How would you try to tell them to visualize what it's really doing to the bullet and the advantages and disadvantages of BC and energy?
Well, I think the first aspect to get a grasp of is the fact that it doesn't matter whether you're shooting a small bullet or a large bullet, they both get affected. And then the difference between those, the actual effect on the bullet at 1,000 yard is actually not that much. So from the perspective of a new shooter, the first thing to just get into their minds is that you have to make a wind call and you have to act on it. And then the second thing is the person looking for a performance advantage. If they choose the best combination, the performance advantage that they have is normally, I'll just hazard a guess at say, across most common cartridges, maybe 10 or 15 inches, 1,000 yards. So in that respect, I don't really think I honestly don't think it's a big deal, right? Because once you have your ballistic calculator figured out and you've got it trued, you kind of just read the numbers and you just put your best shot through the gun, right? You just drive your fundamentals and it'll hit.
Yeah.
Right. That's the way I look at it. Now, some people look at it like really trying to game the system, and they're trying to look for the bullet rifle combination that gets them the best combination for shooting in the wind, in a given wind. Some of us don't have that luxury, right? We can't all shoot, some of the, bigger, faster, more dynamic cartridges, I don't know, something more esoteric, a 375 J-Tech or whatever like that. That's not a rifle you're going to put a lot of rounds through and shoot on a regular basis. So once you've made that decision to go with a more regular cartridge, you're kind of accepting that, hey, I'm going to have 56 inches of wind drift at 1,000 yards with a 10-mile-an-hour wind, or I'm going to have 75. And as long as it's consistent, to me, I really don't mind what the number is. I just live with it and shoot it.
Yeah.
So I don't worry about it. A lot of people seem to think, new shooters in particular, seem to get confused that number can vary from cartridge type to cartridge type. And I think they worry about that more than you really need to. I mean, if you have the time to get the solution from your Ford-off or whatever, just shoot it.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it really makes that much difference. That's the way I think about it,
It's like they're trying to buy themselves a room for error rather than learning just to run with the number and learn how to read it.
Well, hopefully, we'll all be around in another 50 years and we'll have handheld lasers. We just won't have to worry about the wind anymore.
That's right. Yeah, it's not effective.
Line of sight shooting is allowed, right?
So, when you get into the wind, too, the other thing to think about, number one, you can't beat the wind in submission. We talk about here at school. If you take a 22-inch round target at 1,000 yards and you take our school rifles and 223s shooting a 75 grain, and a 338 Lapua. The 338 Lapua's bought himself a 1-point-some-mile-an-hour advantage in the wind. There's math involved in it, but we do it here in the classroom. So you can't cheat it. You can't buy your way out of it. Some rifles have a little bit in the big broad things of, you'll see a rifle with 66 inches of drift at 1,000 and 109 inches of drift at 1,000. But that's the big number. What you want to do is you want to focus on, you got a 22-inch target, how much the wind has to pick up or die down before you get blown off of it. So, for example, if you take a rifle that has 60 inches of drift at 1,000 yards in a 10-mile-an-hour wind, that means it drifts 6 inches for every 1 mile an hour. And that means you've picked up, from center to edge, you've got 11 inches on a 22-inch target, right? So you got 11 inches to miss. And if you've got a 6-inch drift per 1 mile per hour change in the wind, 2 mile an hour and you're off the target.
Right.
And the same thing with the 338, where it has 45 inches of total drift at 1,000 yards. And people look at that and say, "Wow, that's way better than a 308 that has 110 inches." Mm-hmm. What they fail to realize, though, is that 45 inches drift is 4.5 inches per 1 mile per hour, and that gives them a 2 mile an hour shift in the wind. They miss the same target. So it's not the big number; it's the real world number off the size of the target you're shooting, and really, there's not that much advantage other than 1 or maybe 2 mile an hour advantage and you miss the same target.
Right. And so that then once you've understood that and you know what the error is, you kind of know how fast you have to, get that round put into the chamber for your follow-up shot if you miss.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to be able to make that follow-up shot in fairly smart order.
Yeah.
We're always trying to get people to learn that as they're learning how to shoot precision rifle. And I think that's a big deal.
It is, and I think it's a shame, too, like going back to shooting in the wind. We both shot 308s.
Yes.
And, 155 grain bullet out of a 308 with a BC of like 435 and, maybe 29 and change if you're lucky and you're pushing it. I mean, you had to read the wind or you were missing a lot of stuff. I mean,
Yep,
it's
that's right.
wind drift, I think, at 1,000 yards was over 110 inches.
Yeah, and again, promoting what I just said, you've got to be prepared for the miss.
Yeah.
And be able to see the miss, read the miss, and then make a correction
Before the changes start to occur.
Before the changes start to occur.
Yeah, it's something you got to talk to your a lot about the school. Like, I hear you in the background, like, don't go so fast you miss, but don't mess around. If you miss, as the seconds bleed by, the value goes to nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you're always trying. Well, I know I am, right? Because, you can see military shooters and you can see non-military people at the school. The military guy is always putting a new round in the chamber, and the non-military person is sort of waiting for something before they put a round in the chamber.
We're picking our head up and looking around a little bit and messing around. The other thing that's sort of fascinating with the wind too is like people look at it sort of incorrectly. So the best way I can describe what the wind does to your boat is the atmosphere moves like water, right? It's not like you're shooting through water, but the atmosphere is constantly moving. And it's not necessarily pushing your bullet per se, as it is the bullet is just starting to get into motion with it. So as your bullet leaves the barrel, the winds are starting to have an effect because the entire atmosphere is moving. And eventually the bullet, if it stays in flight long enough, will end up drifting at the same air or the speed that the air is moving. So if the wind is moving 10 mile an hour to the left, eventually the bullet, if it stays in flight long enough, will start being influenced in that direction. The reason I say that is a lot of people think that it's pushing it, and it really isn't. Its angle of attack is very shallow to the direction of the wind because it's going forward so fast. That it's not necessarily pushing with it. It's just the bullet's resisting it for a little while until it gets enough influence to start in motion. The reason I say that is if you get into, like if you look at a hot air balloon and we say that the wind doesn't push the bullet per se, if you get into a hot air balloon, it's off the ground and the wind is blowing 10 mile an hour. And if you're in the hot air balloon, you will absolutely feel no wind whatsoever in the basket.
Right.
And
That's exactly right. Yeah.
I always find that to be amazing. Like you would think that you would feel it, that it's pushing you. But if you look at the balloon itself, it's not being pushed or pulled. It's just in motion in the atmosphere. And that's what we're shooting across and through with the bullet, and that's the atmosphere trying to drag our bullet to catch up to it, to say here, it's a 20 mile an hour wind. As your bullet slows down, it's starting to get more of a foothold on it, can start moving it more, and when it gets to the further ends of the envelope, 1,000, 1,200 yards, the bullet's even slowing more, allowing for the wind to start influencing it even more, and it's starting to get it into the atmosphere in motion.
Right. And I think, where we were going with our conversation this morning, we were like, we really need to talk to one of those aerodynamicists stroke people who know a lot about drag, because it seems, to my mind, that if you have a bullet barrel combination, cartridge combination that has good energy out at longer distances, those are the combinations that give you both wind bucking ability, if you want to call it that, the ability to be less influenced by wind, and also the highest energy on target.
Yeah, and what I'd like to do is, I used to know some of the guys at Hornady. I'm going to reach out to them and see if we can't get one of the ballisticians on here to talk more about this, because there's more to it on the back end that maybe some of us like to dive into.
Oh, yes, that would be wonderful, because they're using drag models now, which is much more sophisticated than what we were using a few years ago, right? So they've got much more understanding of the actual effects of external influences on the bullet flight, rather than just it's flying through some air of certain thickness, right?
Yes, and the density, altitude, barometric pressure, heat, height, humidity, how much that makes air more dense, act on the bullet more because it's more dense. So we love this stuff. So the big thing I want to take away from this is we're going to continue on the conversation.
Yeah, yes. we need some input from some very smart people, though.
Yes, yeah, especially those that love to shoot.
Yes.
Some of the engineers. Yeah. So we're going to try to invite someone to maybe dive into the woodworks for you guys that are interested in this. And you can leave some comments down below, or if you have some questions, feel free to email them. But we were talking about this morning when we probably got distracted way longer than we should have before we got started on some work. But this is fun. I mean, number one, don't be intimidated by the wind. It's there. You got to do it. There's really not a lot of mathematical advantages unless you're on the extreme ends.
Yeah, I mean, we always say this at the shooting school. The greatest error is not to try and estimate the wind and the conditions, right?
Yeah.
And just assume that you're going to be able to stay on that target even if you don't make any corrections for it. That's the greatest error you can make as a shooter.
Yeah. Not using a wind meter and actually getting an actual number, just guessing
or winging it.
Yeah, that's a lot of close misses.
Yeah.
So we'll continue on this one. Before we wrap up here, I do want to say another quick thanks. Krieger Barrels. Krieger's a proud sponsor of the show, and they make really fine cut rifled barrels. They're based out of Wisconsin, American-made company. We think they're some of the best in the world. That's why we use them. And they offer this new program called KriegerDirect.com where you can actually log on, purchase your barrel, and have it in as little as 2 to 3 business days. And that's actually really incredible. Being that we are waiting for over a year for the orders that we placed to actually hold barrels and pull them. So that way, like we're going to run into with this brass issue, like we were with primers and everything else, is you just can't get them. And they're actually trying to take care of their customers, and you can actually have it in as little as 2 to 3 business days. So if you want more information or if you need a barrel, stop over to KriegerDirect.com. That's KriegerDirect.com. So before we wrap this podcast up, we're going to continue back on the wind thing, and we definitely want to throw out there the brass thing. I mean, this is something that's been brought up by a couple manufacturers now.
Yeah. Be ready.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you don't have to buy everything, but make sure you've got enough for what you think you're going to use over the next couple of years, and then you won't be held back.
No, our goal now is to stay 2 years out, and we want to be 2 years ahead of the shooting school. So I guess this is our public service announcement.
Look at you with a PSA.
All right. So thank you so much, guys. And thanks, Richard, for coming on and being part of the podcast again. Any final thoughts or words?
Yeah, we talked about this a week or so back when I was on the first time. Our road trip is imminent.
Oh, that's right. That's right. 2 days away, we're leaving.
Yeah, we're going to learn a little bit more about the wind while shooting moving targets.
Yes, and we're going to try to take some drone. We're going to try to take some video footage. The online long-range shooting school, we're going to actually try to film a portion of that will eventually be posted next year on shooting and engaging movers. If you'd like to join us, we have a couple slots left. You can still register. It's going to be this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So a sight in on Friday at no charge. You can join us. But the actual training is on Saturday and Sunday in Swainsboro, Georgia. Just stop over to wolfprecision.net.
And the weather forecast looks good?
Oh, yeah. That's the really awesome part is, I think Friday will come for a little bit of rain. Yep. And then Saturday and Sunday is supposed to be beautiful.
Excellent.
We will take it. So road trip coming up. We'll talk to you guys again next week. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. You're listening to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building Podcast.